Yep everyone, and welcome back to some more Combat Mission Black Sea. Finally. This is an assault game where my Ukrainian infantry are going to be defending a little village against a German Russian motor rifle troops. Now, the last time we did a Black Sea attack defend, it didn't seem very fair, to put it mildly. And one of the things running through Combat Mission Black Sea is that because of the nature of modern warfare, because of the range, accuracy, lethality of the weapons, the way that technology dominates it, and because of the realistic asymmetry between the three sides, it can be pretty difficult to get an interesting, balanced contest. Obviously no one wants to fight on a level playing field in actual war. Everyone is trying to gain as much advantage as possible. So when you go and realistically recreate weapon systems, vehicles, equipment for a computer game like this, it doesn't translate very well into the more balanced, just for fun, competitive environment where everybody should at least have some kind of chance. So we came up with a few things to try and make it a little bit more even this time. We agreed not to pick any tracked vehicles and that neither of us would have any off-map support. So that pretty much translates into a wheeled mechanized infantry fight, or BTRs for everyone, and artillery is literally limited to physical mortar teams on the map itself. It's pretty much an exercise in dialing down the amount of destruction, because what we've got here is an isolated, out of context scenario. And this is one of the things with Combat Mission Black Sea. Modern warfare kind of takes place on a larger scale than the maps will really allow. It's quite difficult to get a sensible, realistic scenario shoehorned into a small, quick battle match like this. So we've got a few limits on what's going on here. This is the map. I've got two objectives to defend, and this really is about holding and denying those objectives. This is an assault game, so most of the points at the end are going to be coming from the objectives, not the kills. And we got these hollow style objectives. I really like these. It's a big ask for the attacker to physically clear out such a big area if it was solid. These hollow ones where it's a narrow strip around the outside of the area are really good because it's not so much of a tall order for the attacker, but it manages to keep the importance of clearing the interior of the area, and the exterior for that matter, of effective enemy forces. So those are the objectives. What about the actual ground? Well, we can pretty much split the map into two big important areas. First up, we've got this vague crescent which follows the line of the village, and it's mostly that familiar kind of Ukrainian rural terrain. So lots of single-story buildings with gardens, plenty of trees thrown in, some quite variable short to medium sight lines and fields of fire. So good terrain for infantry, lots of opportunities to ambush the enemy, and very bad close terrain for enemy vehicles. The second key area is this plateau running alongside the village, because whoever controls that is going to have a solid elevated position looking down into the objective areas, looking down into the village zone. The defender's going to have a hard time. The problem is that the top of the plateau is a big empty wheat field, and any troops I put up there are either going to be hiding in the grain hoping that nobody notices them, or they're going to be crammed into a few areas, this little bunch of trees here or this farmhouse, little farm complex at the top, and they're going to be obvious targets where they can't actually contribute to the fighting down in the village. In effect, the top of the plateau and the village are two very separate areas that aren't directly mutually supporting. So I could choose to pretty effectively defend either the plateau or the villages, because I can't defend both at the same time, because if you're in the village you can't see the top of the plateau, when you're at the top of the plateau you can't see down into the village, if that makes sense. So obviously what I need to do is defend the village zone, because that's where the objectives are. But this same line of sight logic about the plateau works for the attacker here too. If he's got the top of the plateau, he hasn't really gained anything, except an area to move around that I can't observe. And if he wants to get into a position to shoot down into the village or attack down off the plateau over the village, he has to come over the crest and expose himself to the village. So essentially, because of the terrain, the village is in itself a reverse slope position with regards to the plateau. So yes, the village can be dominated by enemy units that pop up on the plateau crest line, but at the same time, the crest line is dominated by defending units down in the village. It's a reverse slope position. If I do ignore the plateau, because I basically have to pick between defending the plateau or the village, it's not as big a deal as it might look. Because the village has this reverse slope element to it, it's actually a pretty solid position, or as solid as it's going to get. And I do kind of mean solid here. There really aren't a lot of opportunities for counter-attacking, because I don't have a very mobile force. I've mostly got infantry, and obviously this kind of terrain, which is good defensive terrain, is bad counter-attacking terrain. I'm going to be having just as bad a time counter-attacking as, hopefully, a German G is going to have attacking. Plus, I can assume that he is going to have people up on the plateau, and I might not be able to see them. He might have some scouts, some observers, some heavy weapons team setting up there in the grain, able to see down into the village fairly well, and he's going to be able to pick up on my movements down there. So, as much as I absolutely hate it, I am pretty much sticking to a static defense here. I really don't like it, but I can't see a lot of room for any kind of subtlety or fanciness. My guys are basically going to dig their holes and die in them. There was a bit of a discussion on the Few Good Men forums a while ago about whether Combat Mission Black Sea is a tactical game. And we've certainly had some people in the Rising Storm 2 Vietnam beta saying that because of the nature of the maps and modern weaponry, there's no room for tactics in that game, because there's no room for things like flanking, and essentially all the maps are these big attritional frontal assault meat grinders. And the fact is that tactics are just whatever you do on the battlefield. If I did something totally insane from the wrong period and organised my men into a huge column and tried to batter my way across the plateau, of course they'd all get massacred, but I would still be using tactics. They would just be ineffective, bad tactics, unless I had enough men, but that's totally different. Tactics are just what you do to try and beat the enemy, and here, my opinion, after looking at the ground, looking at the balance of the forces, taking into account the nature of modern warfare, my best chance is going to be to just give that not one step back order and play for time. It's not fancy, it's certainly not very exciting. Trust me, if I thought I could do anything cool instead, I would be doing it, but that's the hand I think I've been dealt here, and that's the hand I'm going to play. That doesn't alter the fact that it doesn't make for amazing dramatic footage, which is one reason why I kind of grappled with whether or not to actually make a video out of this one. It's pretty workmanlike. I really don't have a lot of decisions to make, certainly no significant decisions, which is why I've spent so long explaining all that. The big deal for me, as usual in the nitty-gritty, is the anti-armor battle. The German G is going to be bringing up a lot of BTR-82s, which have a 30mm cannon on. These are going to be his main source of combat power. His infantry are really going to struggle without that fire support, so they're at the top of my priority list. Luckily, my own Ukrainian infantry squads each have an RPG-7, which is an excellent bit of kit, even if my useless pixel tripping can't aim the damn thing. Closer in, they've also got a few one-shot throwaway RPG-18s that will happily wreck the BTR just as much as an RPG-7. For more long-range work, I'm relying on 2 weapons platoons equipped with Corsair anti-tank guided missiles. These are a little bit like the US Javelin, and they really don't have any problems with all the flimsy 8-wheeled coffins rolling around the place. Then last, but certainly not least, I've got a few BTR-4s set up to cover some important areas like the streets and the plateau from hull-down positions. These are actually quite interesting vehicles. They're kind of fusions of Soviet and Western APZ design philosophies. Essentially they're westernized BTRs, and they have this chunky remote turret on top carrying a 30mm cannon, some anti-tank missiles, a automatic grenade launcher and a machine gun. They're not fantastic at spotting things though, probably because of the 2-man crew, and well, if a bird craps on them they blow up. So I'm not expecting a lot of them. They're mostly in because I needed a little bit of an extra punch, and they are the ammunition carriers for the weapons platoon, so they have all the extra anti-tank missiles in. The mortars were a little bit of a letdown. This is mostly my fault. I figured it would be better to have 120mm mortars rather than 82mm mortars, because, you know, that's like a whole 38mm extra explosion. But of course the minimum range on the 120mm is actually quite a long way, and they did have a pretty worrying dead zone as it turned out. It would probably have been a bit smarter to take some 82mm with more ammunition and a few target reference points for the same price, but obviously hindsight is 2020. And really, that's pretty much all there is to it. It's a nasty stand-up attritional fight. You saw a few highlights there, so here's the whole thing from a lamentably inconsistent overhead camera. Sorry about that, but you can see the general trend, you can see the general run of events as Jarman G tries to push through and clear out my infantry infesting the village. The reverse slope defense of the plateau works pretty well. It takes a few turns to play out, so it's actually quite difficult to show in real time, but you can see on this fast forward replay things popping up on the crest line and then disappearing and turning into these big columns of black smoke. Everything is getting shot up as soon as it comes into sight of those reverse slope positions. I keep saying this is all very boring and workmanlike, nothing fancy at all, just grinding down the time. Eventually we finish up with a draw. Jarman G's managed to get some troops into both sides of the village. He's come across the road and into the village on my right, and he's come down off the plateau into the edge of the objective on my left. So both objectives are contested, nobody gets any points from that, and casualties rise. We've inflicted a fairly even percentage of casualties on one another. I've lost 80 dead, 63 wounded, and lost 3 missing, along with 4 BTRs and 2 of the trucks carrying ammunition for the mortar teams. Jarman G on the other hand has lost 91 dead, 73 wounded, and 24 BTR 82s. That might sound like a lot, but because of the force imbalance here, I think he's still got about 10 or 12 left. It would have been quite interesting looking at the end game to see what would have happened if we had a bit more time. And maybe it was too tall an order for the attacker to just have an hour to do things in. But because it's an assault, and that means the attacker gets something like an 80% point advantage as well as pre-game reconnaissance, so he can get the general idea of how I've set up and deployed. Maybe more time would make it less of a challenge for the attacker. It's hard to tell, but there we go. I'm happy with getting a draw there because I was really facing some overwhelming odds. Bit of a look at the less dramatic, less exciting side of tactics and combat missions. Sometimes you don't really have much choice and you just have to quietly get on with things. That's about it from this corner of the digital Ukraine for now, guys. Hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you in the next video.